Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another retrospective video. Today we're going to be talking about the horror anthology series Tales from the Crypt, which ran from 1989 to 1996 with a total of 93 episodes. The series is hosted by the Crypt Keeper and is played by the wonderful voice actor John Kassir. Well, one of the big things that made Tales from the Crypt special when it first came out was the fact that it was a HBO series. Much other horror anthology shows, including ones that I've talked about like Tales from the Dark Side, Monsters, and Freddy's Nightmares, and other shows, could only really show or do as much in the television format, so a lot of times they would have to get very creative with the stories. But this being a HBO series, it was allowed to include content that was pretty graphic. They really had, full, reign to just kind of do whatever they want or show whatever they want, whereas other previously mentioned horror anthology shows could not. So, and that was something that the original EC horror comics at the time when they came out, there was a lot of controversy about that in the 50s because the original comics were, a lot like that. They were very violent. So it is pretty awesome that for this series that they were able to do that and make a HBO series and make it scary and creepy and interesting. And it's so what's fascinating about it is that there's such a sort of contrast because you have the Crypt Keeper, who is so very silly and goofy, kind of giving it kind of a lightheartedness, introducing us to these stories, and then a lot of times the stories might seamlessly be are really dark, creepy, whilst also being really exaggerated. There's a lot of color in a lot of the stories. So again, a lot in common visually with Creepshow and the original comic books at the same time. And the series would ultimately become very, very popular, and there was a lot of big name kind of guest stars, including people like Christopher Reeve, Dan Aykroyd, Whoopi Goldberg, Ted Danson, Tom Hanks, Joe Pesci, John Lithgow. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Sort of exaggerated, dark humor in, kind of a horror sort of comic book style horror. Then Tales from the Crypt is a series that you will absolutely love because it's all like that, and it's the series just the twists of the series I think are really what make the episodes great, is that they would always have these really great wonderful twists. But with Tales from the Crypt, most of the episodes do have very much of the same kind of stories, the same kind of humor, so even though it's a horror anthology series, it does very much have a very strict kind of overall feel, look, and tone to it, whereas other horror anthology series, it was a little bit more kind of unexpected what you were and weren't going to get, with episode to episode, whereas when you go into Tales from the Crypt, you more or less kind of know what kind of a story you're going to get, but what's always, interesting about it is what's going to be the big twist at the end, how's it going to end, where's it going to go. That's kind of what is the thing that makes this series fun to watch. And for me, being a horror lover growing up as a kid and everything, the whole idea of the Crypt Keeper character, I think really made you want to continue to watch it because you're just such a lovable, goofy character that, again, wonderfully played by John Kassir. And the animatronic effects and the puppet effects and everything, the look of it was great, and again, it very much had would bring you back, give it that old EC horror comic feel to it. And as the series went on, they got a lot more creative with the types of things they had the Crypt Keeper doing. They had him dressing up and being in all kinds of different costumes and settings, and just the things that they would do just with the Crypt Keeper alone in those sequences were always creative. So even if the episode itself might not be the best, you knew you would get some fun shenanigans with the Crypt Keeper. So again, it's just an overall fantastic, great series that is definitely one of my all-time favorite horror anthology shows ever, and probably one of my all-time favorite shows ever as well. And the final episode, weirdly enough, was actually an animated episode, a completely animated episode, which was actually a really gory horror retelling of The Three Little Pigs, and a lot of people seem to really love that episode, but I gotta be honest, to me that I think it's one of the worst episodes ever, to be honest. For me personally, I feel like it was kind of a cop-out to do an animated episode for the very last episode personally, but a lot of people love the episode. Again, the wonderful thing about horror anthology shows is that everybody's going to have different opinions on what episodes are the best and what episodes are the worst. Now, the series did actually have a number of spin-offs, one of which was Tales from the Crypt Keeper, an actual animated cartoon show made that was geared towards kids. that ran for a total of 26 episodes and then was cancelled, but then was later brought back a few years later and had an additional 13 episodes with a slightly different animation style. For, you know, an animated kids show, honestly, it's pretty much exactly that. It has pretty much the same tone, the same style and everything, being based on the EC horror comics, except it's, you know, more geared towards kids. But even though it's geared towards kids, I have to say, honestly, like, they really do push the boundaries of what you could and couldn't do in, you know, a kids cartoon show. And honestly, it's actually a surprisingly really great animated series overall. And I actually was first introduced to Tales from the Crypt Keeper before I saw Tales from the Crypt. So, you know, I kind of grew up really loving this series, and again, it's pretty, they really did push the boundaries of what you couldn't do. And one of the things that was really cool about it is that you had John Kassir also still voicing the Crypt Keeper again for the animated series as well, which was pretty cool. So overall, you know, a pretty solid series. And then apparently there was even a very short-lived kids game show called Secrets of the Crypt Keeper's Haunted House, which apparently was very short-lived, and yeah, it's absolutely bizarre. And there was a couple attempts to do a more sort of direct spin-off of Tales from the Crypt, one of which was they were going to do Two-Fisted Tales. That ultimately didn't pan out, but one actual sort of spin-off was Perversions of Science, which lasted for about one season. This one instead was hosted by a female robot host and had much more of a sort of science fiction kind of tone, kind of stories to it, but very much still being that kind of exaggerated kind of black humor feel to it. But unfortunately, it never quite took off. But most notably, there was a couple of, they actually eventually did do some actual Tales from the Crypt branded feature films. The first of which was Tales from the Crypt Presents Demon Knight, which is a full-on just movie, but with the Crypt Keeper hosting and presenting it. And so it's essentially, you know, a full feature-length episode of Tales from the Crypt, which is a pretty interesting way to go about it. So it wasn't done like Creepshow, where Creepshow was, you know, multiple stories in a feature format. Tales from the Crypt, when they decided to do a movie, they decided to actually do a Tales from the Crypt movie and not just have it be multiple stories, which I think was a good idea, because I think had they done multiple stories, in a way it would have just felt like you were watching no different from watching multiple episodes of the show. So it was a pretty interesting way to do it, and Demon Knight, just as an original movie, is a really great, solid, interesting movie. They were going to follow up with what was described as a psychological thriller that was apparently going to be titled Dead Easy, but then somehow Dead Easy ended up being cancelled, and the creative team was then shifted to make a vampire story called Bordello of Blood, which is not as good as Demon Knight. Is generally not considered to be as good as Demon Knight. But I still, you know, kind of have a soft spot for it anyway, even though it had a lot of production problems. But, you know, and ultimately it was not as successful as Demon Knight, leading them to not do any more films. Was sort of an unofficial film called Ritual in 2002, which does feature the Crypt Keeper, but it's sort of not officially part of the series because it wasn't done under Universal. It's very confusing. And, you know, unfortunately the rights to Tales from the Crypt itself is very confusing, and originally there was going to be a proper reboot of Tales from the Crypt a few years ago by M. Night Shyamalan of all people, which honestly, M. Night Shyamalan being known for all his twist endings might have actually kind of worked for a modern day Tales from the Crypt, but that series ultimately was cancelled before it ever saw the light of day. And apparently the Tales from the Crypt rights are, again, in all kinds of tangled mess. So whether or not we will ever see a proper reboot or return to Tales from the Crypt is unknown. But honestly, more than any show ever, the one that I personally would love to see make a proper comeback is Tales from the Crypt. I would love to see them bring this back. You know, have the, you know, Crypt Keeper come back, have John Kassir play him again, have it be the same style and everything. I mean, I would love to see it come back, but unfortunately, it's most likely that it's not going to happen. In terms of the show's availability, it was initially first released in single season sets, all with, you know, pretty great artwork of the Crypt Keeper, and you even had sort of the Crypt Keeper hosting, you know, the menus on some of the DVD discs in some of them, so they were pretty creative. But unfortunately, most of the single season sets are now out of print, unfortunately. But luckily, several years ago, we finally got a complete series box set, which I have right here, which has all of the season sets, all of the sort of disc content from the season sets is included on here, but the packaging is in more of a regular style, you know, DVD cases rather than sort of the more deluxe packaging, slightly more deluxe sort of fold out packaging that you got with the original season releases. But again, you've got all the same artwork, and you've got all the contents on this, contents from the single releases as well, including all the commentaries and everything. So yeah, so you pretty much are getting everything. Now, in terms of whether or not the show is ever going to be coming to Blu-ray, it's kind of unknown whether or not the elements really exist for them to do a proper Blu-ray transfer for this series or not. But again, with all the kind of the rights tanglement issues, there's a good chance that that's going to kind of stop it from getting another release in the future. So if I were you and you want to get the complete series of Tales from the Crypt, I would just go ahead and get this complete series set while you can. It's a pretty nice set overall, and yeah, so definitely worth getting. Alright guys, that's gonna be it for this retrospective video. Be sure to subscribe for more videos, and until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible. And I will see you in the next video.